So, of course, as I'm sure you know, over the last week or so, this now famous Me Too conversation has started up, and I wanted to offer a coach's perspective because, over the last 18 years, I've worked with, countless women that have dealt with sexual harassment, assault, abuse, and everything in between that you could imagine in terms of really, really horrid experiences, as well as experiences that aren't really the worst things you've ever heard. They're not horrible per se, but they definitely brought up very intense emotion and intense issues, things that a client really needed to work through, come up with, deal with, etc. So I just had to share this because there are so many conversations that I'm having currently with clients and that I've had in the past with clients because of this issue. I said, you know what, this might be the time to share it, just because it's in the conversation currently here on Facebook, here on YouTube. There's no doubt that more and more of the clients that I've worked with in the past, and more women and men, are just kind of coming out and opening the door and opening a window on the abusive experiences that they've had, the experiences where they've in some way been taken advantage of, the experiences that they've had where they've been hurt or felt a loss in some way. And because I deal with this on a regular basis, if not daily, at least weekly or monthly, I want to share some of the experiences that my clients have had, some of the things that I will do with a client that is working through these kind of challenges, and some conversations that hopefully will make a difference for anyone who might check this out now or in the future. So I want to start just by talking a little bit about the pain, because the fact is that the reason why I think this comes up, and it comes up so intensely, and there's some debate going on about it, and there's some arguments going on about it, and there are some real soul searching and some all sorts of different negative emotions that are happening: anger, hurt, sadness, a sense of powerlessness, worthlessness. These are the kind of things that people feel when it comes to this issue, I think, of being abused, hurt, harassed, assaulted, raped, etc. So when we're going through that, the hurt, the pain, the anger that's associated with especially the worst cases of this kind of thing, rape, incest, abuse, assault, etc., that pain, generally speaking, is no different than other cases of abuse, other cases of catastrophic loss. When you feel a deep sense of loss, a spiritual pain, a sense that you've been attacked or hurt or taken advantage of, whether sex is involved or not, this is something that these are universal emotions that all of us have felt. So I think one of the biggest issues I see just in conversations is that people get divided on this, like somehow when sexuality is entered into it, that makes it somehow radically different when there's hurt and loss and upset and worthlessness and that kind of stuff, compared to when it's not. And the fact is that when you feel worthless, you feel worthless. When you feel hurt, you feel hurt. When you feel loss, you feel loss. You feel anger or pain or helplessness. You just feel that stuff, whether sex is there or not. I'm not saying it makes no difference, but on the whole, these emotions are these emotions. They're emotions that are universal, that everyone has felt, after a certain point in their life. So if we're looking and talking to men and saying, well, they can't understand, it's like, maybe they don't understand your exact experience. I get that. But they understand what it feels like to feel worthless. Gosh knows they understand what it feels like to feel powerless. or any of the other emotions that you might go through or that anyone might go through when sexuality is involved. Now, to be fair, and that said, when someone is taken advantage of, man, woman, child, etc., sexually abused or assaulted sexually, there is a different ingredient that is offered there, on top of the pain, on top of the emotions of the situation. It's a spiritual pain. It is, and it's also one that society places a lot of ideals about or rules about, that when all of a sudden when we've done something in that realm, in that world, in most societies, if we go outside the lines of what those rules, mores, ethics, ideals are, suddenly it's almost like we start to feel like, well, everybody's going to look at us the wrong way now. It means something about us, not because we really necessarily even think that, is because, well, everybody else will think that, so, I should take on their beliefs, I should take on their thoughts, let's say. We're going to come full circle to that a little bit later, but I wanted to bring that up, that yes, there are some slight differences, there's no doubt, but there are only differences generally because of the way we look at sexuality, not because sexuality itself is some giant unicorn off in the corner where it's a completely different universe or something like that. It's not. Pain is pain and hurt is hurt, on the whole at least. Any anger or sense that problem, that set of issues is somehow radically different, is generally meeting a need of significance about the event, like believing that event is any more significant than anything else in our life that might be intensely painful or pleasurable, for that matter. And I think that's one of the problems that comes up. We make that thing that happened so significant, so important, that suddenly the rest of our life is colored by it. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't need to be. And in fact, most of the time, it probably shouldn't be. Now, I hate to say shouldn't, because that's just my judgment, right? And so, you could agree or disagree, right? But the reason I say it shouldn't is because when we make a sexual problem or sexual abuse or sexual assault or sexual harassment, we make that more important as an issue or problem or thing to deal with than everything else in our life, than who we are, than our spirituality, than our family, than just anything else. We put that above everything. Then we end up worshiping that problem. We end up worshiping the person that somehow hurt us or abused us, because then all of a sudden we're like giving them control. That's not cool, right? So yes, it is important. Yes, it's an issue. Yes, these are painful things. But let's not decide that they're somehow more important than anything else in our lives, that many times there's other things that are more important than just that one moment, or even if it was multiple moments. And again, we'll tend to generalize when we experience lots of pain. We say, like, I don't want to ever experience that again, so then this is the way men are, this is the way life is. And we create limiting beliefs from negative experiences. I think I even wrote that down. Yes, I did. I had a slide about this somewhere. So, when we have a negative experience, any negative experience, especially, something where there's a lot of rules or intensity about it, for women or for men, sexuality included in that, negative events can create limiting beliefs. And so we start with some negative experience. All of a sudden, a man takes advantage of you, and suddenly you have a belief about men. Men are like this. Men don't understand, or men are just predators, or like that is a gross generalization. And by the way, even if you know better logically, if you feel it inside, you still might treat people that way. You might operate that way. Or once on the other side, women are like this. I mean, how many men have gone through a bad experience where a woman took advantage of him for, maybe not sexual purposes, but something else, and he decided all women are gold diggers, or all women are just out for themselves, they're so selfish, or they're liars, and men will generalize too, right? So there's no like guilty parties here. This is the human condition, is when we get a lot of pain and we have a lot of intensity about something, we tend to generalize, not because we generalize everything in our life, but because when something is that painful, our brain says we have to be on the lookout for that, so it never happens again. And that's when we'll overgeneralize about things like this. Generalizing about sex, like all sex is bad, right? Or relationships, like in relationships, this is the way this has to be. Like there's certain rules that we'll have about relationships to try to protect ourselves, let's say. Beliefs about people in general, like all people are bastards or something like that. And by the way, this is one of the big ones, especially when it comes to sexuality, because for a lot of reasons, not to get into those, beliefs about ourselves. We'll come up with identity beliefs, like I was bad because that happened to me, or I made a mistake, or I was wrong, or I'm worthless, or I'm unworthy, or I'm broken, or I'm dirty, or I'm a victim, or I'm helpless. I can't protect myself. I mean, you can go on and on and on about this. I'm just talking about this narrow area of abuse and being a victim in those ways, or having been victimized in those ways, or taken advantage of in those ways, or hurt or threatened in those ways. But, I mean, how many experiences have we had in life where we've made something up about ourselves that really is not true? It's a gross generalization, but it's stuck because it was so painful. It was such an intense memory for us, and then it became an identity. So these are just generally things that happen, especially in these kind of experiences. I had a session a little while ago, one of my clients, and she said, I was talking to a friend that I really respect about a time where I was sexually assaulted. And this friend of mine said, why did you let it happen? In so many words. I'm sure I'm paraphrasing this and probably not being fair to that individual because I wasn't there. But this is basically the question that came up. It's like, why did you let this happen? How could you let that happen? And by the way, some of my clients have actually questioned themselves. Like nobody else had to say that. They questioned themselves. Like, how could I have let this happen? Why did I let this happen? Now, why would you ask that question? Some of the reason might have just been you want to protect yourself in the future. So you want to find out, what did I do wrong there so I could do better in the future, I could protect myself. It might be understandable. But besides that, other people might ask that because maybe they're somehow blaming you for the experience, or you're blaming yourself, right? So this is a question that I think it's not always a valid question, number one. It's also probably not a fair question most of the time. But when you ask a question like this, and by the way, there's presuppositions, there's limiting beliefs inside this question. One of the beliefs, and by the way, this may or may not be true. It depends on the situation, right? But one of the reasons why this might not be a valid question is because it presupposes you let it happen. It's like you're somehow responsible for it happening. Now, in personal growth and personal development and positive psychology, the platitude that we like to say is, whatever happens, take responsibility for it. Because that will empower you. Because no matter what, you're responsible for everything in your life. Okay, so if you're coming from that perspective here, and you're trying to empower yourself through, like, I'm going to take responsibility for everything that happens to me, and therefore I'm going to be more powerful in the future, look, more power to you. But most of the time, that's not the perspective that this question is coming from. A lot of the time, it's like, it's your fault, or you're wrong, or you're bad, or you somehow... you wore the wrong dress or something like that. And from that perspective, it's coming from a perspective of blame, not from a perspective of, I'm going to be responsible for my future. I see what happened. I'm never going to let that happen again, right? So one of the reasons why this is just not a valid question a lot of times is because it's coming from the presupposition or the generalization of you let it happen, is you're the reason why it happened or something like that. And that's not cool. That said, if this is a question that someone's asking, I might actually work with them to understand how they can answer that question. And as a client, I'm thinking of a specific client that long time ago actually shared this and said, I want to know why in that situation I stayed in the situation. I stayed in the situation longer than I really should have. Why did I let it happen after I knew it was happening? Why did I let the abuse go on? Why did I let the harassment go on? Why did I let myself repeatedly be sexually assaulted, perhaps? And so we talked a lot about this because this particular client, she really values her own morals and ethics highly. But at the same time, she's an achiever, right? She's a go-getter. She makes things happen. In this particular relationship was what I might call a power relationship, and so she was in a situation where she wanted to succeed and she needed this individual's help. She believed at that time to succeed, and so although she valued highly her ethics and morals of not letting this happen, she also said, well, at that point in my life, I put my own success above my morals. I put succeeding above ethics. And she started to cry when we talked about this, and I thought, that I can understand. That might really hurt to feel like you're someone who would allow that to happen. But then I told her this, what I actually put down on this next piece of paper. You did not put success above your ethics at that point, I would bet. I didn't know for sure, but what I told her was, you were so serious about succeeding that you had decided that your need to survive was like connected with success. And so for you, survival and success were like the same thing. It's like, for some people, it's like, if I don't get that job, I'm going to die. And if I, like the needs that we have, the survival needs, the need to feel good about ourselves, the need to feel certain, like we have control over a situation or our lives, the need to feel connected and need to feel loved. These needs are not options for us. They're not like higher level values like ethics and morals are. Like, those are optional, ultimately. No matter how important you feel they are, generally they're optional. What's not optional is you meeting your survival needs. You have to meet those needs. And we sacrifice our values to meet our survival needs. So in that situation, I believed, at least, and this is what I shared with her, in that situation, you somehow believed at that time that if you didn't go back, you would fail in your business, you would fail in your career because you weren't successful yet. You wouldn't have any certainty about your success. You wouldn't have any significance because now you're a failure. Now you're not as good as the others. You're not going to compete. You felt you needed this man to compete. He was the one who had all the power in that situation. So you went back because you thought, not because you thought success is more important than your ethics, but you went back because you thought, if I don't go back, I'm not going to make it. I'm going to be out of control. I'm going to be insignificant and unworthy. And for you, that's like death. That's like psychological death. For any of us, it's psychological death. Just the way she wired it up in her head, at that time, it was like life or death for her. So what happened in that situation, my perspective on that was, yes, you sacrificed that value of ethics to meet your survival needs. You did it to survive at the moment, not because you value success more than ethics. I don't believe that for a second. And she thought about it, and she said, I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about at the time that it was like, I felt like I might not even survive if I didn't keep going back to this situation where I was working with this individual where I felt like I had to in order to succeed. But not just succeed, survive. So how many of us are in that situation at times where we're connected to someone, whether it has anything to do with sexual abuse or not, when we're connected to somebody that is somehow doing something to us or taking from us or hurting us in some way that we don't feel is right. We know it violates our values, and we almost feel like we're violating our own values to even participate in that, but we do it anyway. And the reason is not because of our values, not because we have bad values or our values are screwed up. It's not to say they're not. I mean, who knows? But generally speaking, it's because somebody's just trying to survive psychologically. A really intense example of this would be in the concentration camps, like Auschwitz. People did horrible things. If you know the stories of those camps, people hurt each other, killed each other, robbed each other, who were actually victims in the camps, killed each other. And they did it not because they're bad people. They didn't do it. These were genuinely good people, highly moral, ethical people. But they violated all that at the time because they were trying to survive. And the bottom line is, as human beings, we, like, just because we've got enough food, just because we've got enough water and air, doesn't mean that we believe we'll survive. Some people that are going to watch this stream or watch this video are in a situation in their life right now where they feel like they're not going to survive. They're in survival mode, but they don't call it survival. It's not food or water for them, it's money. And they equate money with survival. Or career, and they equate career for survival. Or love from a family member, and they equate that with survival. Happens all the time. So we mistake something that maybe is not needed to survive as something that we need to survive, and all of a sudden our lizard brain, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, whatever it is, starts to kick in, and that driver forces action that we would never do in our highest selves, in our most our highest ethics, if you will, or our highest intent, if you will. We're blowing that off for the moment because we're just trying to survive. Every one of us has an animal within ourselves. And so sometimes this happens. And so a woman who might be blaming herself because she went back to an abusive situation or a harassment situation or a sexual assault situation, the fact is that she might have just been wired up for survival. And by the way, there's a lot of men in these situations who prey on that, right? They're like, I know she needs me to survive, so I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that to my advantage to get what I want, take advantage of her. Of course, that hurts her in the process. But at that point, subconsciously, she may actually be willing, even though she's unwilling consciously to participate in that, she's willing unconsciously because her brain is saying you have to do this to survive. People do all sorts of things to survive. And so rather than blaming ourselves and saying, well, I just let it happen, there must be something wrong with me, say, wait a second, I did what I felt I needed to do at the time. I know better now. So I would never let that happen again. And this brings us to like these kind of dominance and submission relationships, these power relationships, these intimidation relationships. This is a big part of what causes this to happen, where someone seems to be allowing it to happen who should really like run away or attack back or fight back or something like that. It's because, when you're in this position here, you're not exactly feeling like you're in a position to fight back a lot of times. And this is the position that sometimes people who victimize others, people we would call the monsters, so to speak, really taking advantage of that relationship. It's power and intimidation relationships. The client of mine that posted this the other day on this hashtag, she said, when I started out, when I moved to America, she's immigrated to America, I was not in a place of power. She said, starting out, I was the maid, I was the nanny, or later I was like the assistant. She was this individual in this relationship, right? Even if it wasn't this exaggerated. And more often than not, I had to report to a strong, powerful man. And so some men will get themselves in that position of power so they can use that, like I said. And it'll seem like this individual is somehow immoral all of a sudden because they're allowing this to happen. But the real reason is because they're in this situation and they're just trying to survive a lot of times. So it's not morals over success or success over morals, like it might seem a lot of times. It's someone who's in this situation and they can't emotionally see another way out, even if logically they know better. The logical brain is not running the show in this kind of situation. It's just not. And you can't beat yourself up. And my client, I didn't say this in so many words, but the point of this whole conversation was, why would you beat yourself up for when you're in the situation where someone was really running the show and you had no control emotionally at that time? Now you do, and it's great. You'll never want to get yourself in that situation again, but to blame yourself for that in the past when you just didn't get it at the moment emotionally to the point where you maybe could take action at the level that you know now that would have been the best thing to do. To kick yourself for that, that happening in the past, is it doesn't help anybody. It just hurts you and hurts the possibility of that in the future, right? And it also limits you in your life. So this is, and then by the way, this is, I mean, it's funny how this is the next part of the conversation. That kind of kicking yourself can lead to blame or shame or judgment. Because we blame ourselves, or someone else blames us. This is this happened the other day, I think, because one of my clients said, I was talking to my friend and he asked, "Why did you let that happen?" And I freaked out. I got angry, and then I got sad, and I cried, and it would be an understatement to say that's an overreaction, right? Now, by the way, you might fight me back and say, well, that's not an overreaction. That was so horrible that man would say that. He would say, why did you let that happen, right? How could you, right? But at the same time, again, why would you respond that way? What's the basis of that response? That anger, that need to fight back when somebody's just asking a question. Why would it be? It's because at some level you're validating that question. If it's invalid, then you're just like, okay, this guy's an idiot. Answer the question, or just say that's a stupid question to ask. Why would you ask that, right? Why would you get so upset? It's because at some level you're probably blaming yourself. At some level there's a sense of shame because you put their opinion above your own at that moment. Or you took that opinion on as your own. Not just maybe they judged you, because no one's judgment can hurt you. If I judge you and say you're stupid to be a victim of that or something like that, that can't hurt you. That's, sticks and stones, as they say, right? But if you take that judgment on, decide that judgment is valid, that can hurt you tremendously, because then you're hurting yourself, basically. So this is the old blame, shame, and judgment. Now, this is the big one, though, I would say on this. The big one is judgment, because really blame and shame, what are those? Those are just judgments also, right? I'm blaming myself for screwing this up, for having this fall 6 different ways. All right, anyway, that comes from judgment. That's your judgment, right? So if you have shame, you're judging yourself in such a way where you'd feel shame. If you blame yourself, what is that? It's my fault. That's a judgment. So this all comes down to judgment. So my client, same client I was talking to about this, said, and I don't even think she used these words, but I could hear it in the conversation. And I asked her, Are you wondering if you're to blame? Are you wondering if this is somehow your fault? And she said, yeah, I think I am at some level. So we brought it out. We got it out in the open. And in fact, another client of mine who posted on some social network this week said something similar. She said, somehow in my mind, each incident was my fault. What is that? It's a judgment. So we're in this realm of judgment still. So I don't think that the couple clients that I've worked with who've said something like that, or the ones that I've seen post those similar type of words, I don't think that's an isolated incident. I think this is actually very common, that we judge ourselves most harshly, and that the judgment that comes from others is nowhere near as catastrophic, emotionally speaking, than our own judgment. So, did I do something wrong? Am I to blame? That kind of thing. And so, why would you ask that, by the way? Why would we judge ourselves in that way? It's actually very understandable. There's actually a positive reason for that kind of judgment. This is what I shared with my client that I was working with on this. The reason why we would do that is because we don't want this stuff to happen. Like, this is something bad that happened to us. We don't want to feel that pain again. We don't want to feel that abuse. We don't want to feel that powerlessness, whatever it was. And so what do? We say, well, it's my fault. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to change this. And by the way, I totally honor if your outcome is just to make it better in the future. But to make judgments on yourself, something you did in the past or someone else did in the past or whatever, that generally does not create a very positive response. It generally doesn't do us a whole lot of good. And so we got to see that as a judgment, just some kind of knee-jerk reaction in our minds. So if I can get this to flip without... So rather than saying, okay, what's wrong with this, or what's my judgment about my screw up, or what I didn't do right, or how I brought it on myself, or something like that, if you really do have a positive intent, it's not to beat yourself up, and generally it's not. If the real reason for trying to bring those kind of things up, or someone else's reason for bringing that up, is that they want to empower you for the future, that you want to make sure that this bad thing doesn't happen again, rather than saying what's wrong with me and judging that, say what would I rather do? What would I do differently? What would be the better situation? What would be the better outcome? That's not going to, if you just say, well, this bad thing happened to me in the past, okay, but I'm not going to judge myself. What would be better if that kind of thing was to begin to occur in the future? What would I do differently? What would be a better outcome? What would be a better situation? Generally speaking, that's not going to make you feel like bad or sorry or something like that, any more than what naturally may happen, or any more than you already had in the past. Because just to do that is probably not going to help the situation tremendously. There's plenty of pain associated with things that have happened in the past. We don't need to dredge it up and judge ourselves and add fuel to the fire. So what I would say is, what's better, or what would I prefer to happen? What would I do differently? Things like that, rather than what's wrong with me. Because what's wrong, once you say it's wrong, you can never change it. You can't do anything. And that leads us to the past. Because ultimately, most of the conversations that have happened around this over the last week or so, since Weinstein was kind of outed and this kind of thing came up, was discussions around things that have already happened. Now, those same things are happening even to this day. They're happening right now. There's no doubt. But most of the conversations that are really hurtful, the conversations that are really intense, the conversations that are holding us back in our lives, or sexually, or in our relationships, or with each other in society, or for ourselves in our career, or our emotions, or sense of who we are, our worthiness, any of those areas, it's the past. It's living in the past. Why would we do that? Well, it's because we're recreating a pain that probably happened in the past, or creating new pain in the moment by some decision or identity or idea that we made up starting in that moment when we were somehow hurt or taken advantage of. That's what's happening. And by the way, gals, chime in on any of this if you see somewhere where I'm missing it, or I'm wrong, or I'm off base, or you think I don't get it, because I'm not coming from your perspective. Let me know. Like, I really hope that our lady coaches, our female influencers, leaders, will collaborate on this to support those that are stuck in the past in some way, or are limited in some way by not the experience. Obviously, something physical could happen to you, and that hopefully repairs over time, but the mentality lives on. And so I think you can make a bigger difference than I can, probably, because I'm not exactly the perfect package to talk to women about this, although many of them will, because they know that I can tap into the mindset piece. I can work with them on that, and that's really all I'm sharing. And I hope that you take what I've mentioned here, or what you already do, and you can add value to this conversation for my benefit, so I can make a difference, and also hopefully for those that you touch. Anyway, back to this, living in the past. So the question I'd have for you on this one is, and again, most of the judgment, most of these assessment, most of these limitations are coming from a past self. They're coming from some belief or idea that we created in the past, and we're just kind of living that same past over and over and over again. We're going back to the same crappy movie over and over and over again. So let me ask you a question about this. And this is something I don't think I've asked any of my clients this recently, but talking about time though, would you change the past if you could? Let's say you were horribly taken advantage of, assaulted, raped, coerced, harassed in some way. Would you change that? And by the way, the knee-jerk reaction is probably yes. That's probably the automatic, because the whole subconscious mind is dealing with pain about that. So it's like, yep, I would totally change that. But here's the thing. There were plenty and tons of positive things that came out of that. I don't mean that was a positive thing. Okay, so please don't get me wrong on this one. But every adversity, every problem, everything where someone else has hurt us or we've hurt ourselves or something like that has deepened a sense of whether it's empathy for others around that or a sense of hunger for ourselves to grow, to learn more, to dig deeper, to get through the pain, to live and express who we truly are. So that barrier, whether it's being hurt by someone else or just not getting what we wanted and crying about that, or life has painful events, right? And any one of those events, you could just say, well, none of that should have happened, and so I just changed the past. However, there's plenty of painful things, even if that's not one of them that you're thinking right now. There's plenty of painful things that you probably wouldn't change because it created something in you that gave you resources that you still have to this day. It had you make decisions that were very positive, even to this day, or had you make a difference for others in a way that they never could have had you not brought that to the table. So if the answer to that question, would you change the past if you could? If the answer to that question is yes, then it's really important to just remember you cannot change the past. You will never go back in the past. The past doesn't exist. So needing to change that is it's like, would you change the fact that the sky is pink or the sky, I don't know, this sky is brown? It's not, right? So it's not even real anyway. So how can you change something that doesn't exist? You can't. So if you want to change the past, just, first of all, admit that the past doesn't exist. So how can you change something that doesn't exist anyway? So if you're trying to change something that doesn't exist, you're in crazy land. What you really want to change, my guess would be, is not the past. You want to change the feelings you have when you think about things that did happen in the past. You want to change your perspective on that. You want to change what you're doing today that you focus on the past about. I've got a comment, Jeff. I never equated putting up with survival. Yeah, and again, that's why, and it's so unfortunate because there are people that make that judgment. They say, well, she put up with it, and they use it as an excuse. They use it to excuse a man's behavior, let's say, or they use it as a way to hurt or put down someone else, make them wrong and fight back, or we'll use it on ourselves, right? It's like, well, I put up with it, so it's like my fault. Right? It ends up being blame, shame, judgment, living in the past, etc. But the fact is, the reason why somebody's not putting up with it, they're in survival. So thanks for sharing that, because it's like so easy to blame ourselves, so easy to blame other people when we don't even realize what's really going on. When we learn what's really going on, even for someone who's abusive, who's hurting other people, we can start to have empathy and understand why, not to make it right, not to say it's okay, right? Maybe it's not okay that you even put up with that, right? But if they were in survival, or if they were, that was the only choice that they had with the resources they had at the time, psychologically, then at least we can understand why it happened. And hopefully that can get us out of the sense that, well, I could have done it differently, but I didn't, so there must be something wrong with me. Rather than saying, what, this is how we're wired, and now I know better. So really great. I appreciate that. Okay, coming back to the living in the past. So first of all, you can't change the past. Second, are you the same person that you were back then? Even if this happened a couple of years ago. Are you the same person? Because if you're not, which you're not, there's no way you're that same person, then trying to change that person, again, would be crazy, would be ridiculous. Why would you change someone that's no longer here? The fact is that, and this has been told many times to me by one of my original coach mentors, Tony Robbins, he would always say, there's not one atom, not one molecule in your body today that existed, that was in you 2 years ago. Because we completely change out our every single part of us is there. The pattern still exists, but we recreate ourselves every couple years or so, build completely new bones, new lungs, new face, new brain, new everything, basically. Now, by the way, it doesn't mean all the cells necessarily change out, but the atoms, the molecules in those cells, they get replaced, they get Everything kind of moves through. There are pathways through which the nutrients, the air, the things that we take in turn into us, and then the rest of it just goes out as waste, right? So you don't, like, the person that you were back then doesn't even exist physically anymore. Now, mentally, you may be playing some of the same games that person played. Okay, fair enough. But chances are you've learned so much since then. So, yes, if you see that situation from a past judgment, if you see that situation from a past self, even if that's not who you are today, you will end up living in the past, and the past will be your future. You'll just end up repeating it. We'll be doomed to repeat that. So rather than judging the past, and rather than beating up the past self that didn't know any better or didn't understand or was just emotionally compromised or whatever it was, rather than beating up that person from the past, what you can do is make a powerful decision for the future. A coaching session I had this week, I actually said this to my client. I said, look, your past has nothing to do with how you feel now. Nothing. I don't care if you were abused horribly, if you were raped, if you were sexually assaulted, if you're harassed, anything. Nothing whatsoever has any impact whatsoever on today. However, if you keep thinking about the past, and then you take that past and you project it into your future, like, this is the way men are, this is the way I am, or I'm worthless, or I made a mistake and I'm just an idiot, or I can never be safe again, or something like that, and you project that into the future has total impact on us and who we become in the moment. Because the brain is set up not to live into the past. The brain is set up to take care of us for the future. The brain is just here. It's like a simulation of what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? We're always trying to work that out. We're trying to figure that out. So if we take the past and we project it into our future, yes, the past will seem like it has a huge impact on us today. But the truth is it doesn't. The truth is the future we projected the past into, that's what has all the impact. That's the bottom line. So if you live in the past, the reality is you're not really living in the past, because the past doesn't exist. You're living in a future that you've made up to try to make it look like your past in some way. And you are not that person anymore. So to beat yourself up about it would be crazy, because that person isn't there. If you would never let that happen to you again, if you would change how you'd operate, if you've changed your life today because of that, because you know better now as to what's going on, then to try to go back into the past and relive that again and again would be crazy. It just doesn't. It's not going to help anybody. Knowing that that'll never happen to you in the future, then you can create a future where that's not included. That's not a part of it. And if you even got close to that again, my guess is you would know what to do. Those that have been hurt the worst, chances are they have the greatest tools to make sure they're never hurt again. Those that this shit has never happened to, they're the ones we got to worry about, right? Because they're not necessarily prepared. Even if they think they are, a lot of times they may not be, right? So you've got great equipment if you've been through this. And so it's not being grateful for the situation and what happened, but be grateful for who you've become in response to that, knowing that, you know what, you don't have to be scared anymore or feel sorry or feel like something less than who you really are. Make a powerful decision for the future. Let's get out of the past. Because when we try to protect ourselves, the protection, especially when women I've worked with who have gone through situations like this, I've seen this posted several times, is that someone will try to become unattractive so they can protect themselves. They may gain weight as a result of that. This is not uncommon. Or they'll protect themselves in other ways. And so what happens is they go into this pattern of, I have to protect myself, understandably. And as one of my clients said this week on social, she said, I became better and better at protecting myself. My years in particular industry, basically the movie industry, taught me like a ninja. I had to be invisible yet always on high alert. I mean, you can imagine how much that could degrade one's authenticity by constantly being invisible but always on high alert. You imagine how challenging it would be to be yourself operating in that way? That's all protection. That's what that's all about. So now, by the way, it's not that I wouldn't want you to be protected. I wouldn't want that client to be protected. Rather, though, I would rather look for ways for them to be empowered. And so for a client that really feels like she's unsafe or she's not safe, I would work with her on how can she empower herself, because if you're powerful enough, safety comes along with that. Someone who's safe, though, a lot of times puts many walls up that they're not empowered at all. So it's great to be smart. I don't disagree with that, but I think it's important for any client to understand that there's no such thing as protection per se. Life is going to bring all sorts of things that there's no way we can protect ourselves from. And yes, do the best you can to protect yourself. And at the same time, ultimately, no matter how many walls we put up, we're never going to be fully protected. If for no other reason than that we end up kind of weakening ourselves when we're protected by this bubble that we put up, this inauthenticity, this guardedness, right? We could become rigid. We are not open anymore. We have no strength behind that wall, so to speak. So there's no real protection emotionally, at least. The wall that protects is the wall that isolates or separates. The wall that protects becomes the wall that isolates or separates. So, again, this is nothing against anyone who wants to protect themselves. I'm all for you, but I'm not for the wall. And I'm not for isolation. I'm not for you separating yourself from people, especially if you really could connect with them and they're people that aren't going to hurt you and that really do care. Obviously, if there's somebody who's going to attack you, yeah, separating and isolating from them is probably a very good idea. And then finally, I think we're coming full circle here. This is one of the conversations that I've heard come up a couple times over the last week especially. And in so many words, it's like, half the pain a lot of times that comes from these kind of experiences is what are people going to think about me? Not just because it happened, but if I go public, if I share it, if I let people know, it's like, how will they judge me? It's like worried about society's opinions or other people's opinions. I think it's like more than half the emotional pain, at least, that's associated with the abuse and the harassment and the problems that we're talking about this week especially, is someone adopting society's judgments, society's beliefs, their rules, worrying about their views. So my coaching around that is really, really simple. It's like, stop worrying about their views. Stop worrying about everybody else's, what they're going to think. And by the way, you're still going to care about what they think, but if you let your fear about others' judgments, society's thoughts, if you let that keep you from empowering yourself and others, keep you from doing the greatest good for yourself and others, keep you from what your true destiny is, number one, you're primarily hurting yourself, but you're also hurting others. You're hurting others and holding them back and keeping from them what's possible because of the gift that you could have been for them. So don't just do it to protect yourself, or don't just make a change to take care of you. Do it for others as well. There's a client I've worked with that, she, is pursuing a way to support other victims of a particular individual, because not just for her, it's because she cares about others. She doesn't want to see that happen for other people. She had to get past this thing, worrying about other people's judgments. So I think that, a big piece of the puzzle here, and one of the reasons why, like when someone will bring up, sexual issues with me as a coach, I don't pull back one bit. I don't change the way that I work with them per se, because I know that, not to say that I don't have necessarily a knee-jerk reaction or I don't have my own judgment, but I'm very, very sensitive to the fact that they probably already are carrying this like societal judgment kind of idea with them to that session. And I don't want to contribute to that. So I'm going to be very matter of fact and very bottom line with them about these situations, not because I don't care, and I'll still be very empathetic with them, but because I know it's like, my job as their coach is to make zero judgments about it. Because I know they've already probably judged the situation, judged other people, judged me, or judged themselves more harshly than I could ever do. So I don't want to contribute to that in any way, shape, or form. I'm not there to judge. I'm there to support them and separating, because a lot of times they'll say, well, I did this wrong, or what about this, or something like, they'll say something that clearly it's a limiting pattern for them, and I'll ask them, is that what you really think, or is that like you thinking about what other people will think? You thinking about what society's beliefs are, what their rules are, what their judgments are? So part of my job is to divide that and say, what is everybody else saying, and what are you really saying? Because a lot of times we'll adopt other people's voices for our own, thinking it's our own. And so somebody hurt you, somebody violated you in some way, or whatever your words would be to say that, and then because society says that's bad, or something's wrong with you because that happened, or well, now you're dirty because of that, it's like you're going to take that on as your belief? Look, yes, we want to get along with other people, and we're all hardwired to try to stay in alignment with society, which is probably one of the reasons why we'll take those on, even though those are kind of ridiculous ideas, right? Because we, way back, thousands of years ago, in the jungle, if we didn't agree with our tribe, even if our tribe was doing really stupid stuff, and you look at a lot of these tribes, they do all sorts of crazy rituals and stuff like that even hurts each other, right? But if you went against the tribe would excommunicate you. You were sent out in the jungle and you died. So people that aren't afraid of what other people think, they were eliminated from the gene pool a long time ago. So it's a natural knee-jerk response. But you really got to consciously fight against that. When there is something like sexuality where society makes such big taboos and judgments about what's good, what's bad. There was a client I worked with, and she said, I became sexually active at a young age, at about 15, 16. And, I was immature. I used it, as a way to get attention, and I was promiscuous. And, I keep thinking, well, something's wrong with that, and that maybe that's me. And I said, look, you were a go-get-it type of person. You were 15 or 16. You didn't know any better. You probably had a lot of fun during that time. And you know what? There are probably some situations you would never want to be in again that were probably painful for you as well. And other people probably judged you for that. But, you weren't a full-grown human being. You weren't mature enough necessarily to make that determination. And, you're married now. You have a great relationship. You have a mature relationship. You have a spiritual relationship. You wouldn't want to go back there. It's not that that's bad. It's just that you're in a better situation now, and you know what you really think is right now. But you didn't have those choices back there necessarily because you just didn't even know any better. But the bottom line is society will still judge someone like that. The question is, are you going to judge yourself that way? Or are you just going to realize, I was a kid, and I made some mistakes, I'm never going to make those again. And the fact is, I did them probably for positive reason, because I was enjoying myself at the time. But that kind of using sexuality for power, or using it to manipulate a man, or whatever, I wouldn't do that in the future now. And I don't need to, because I've got a wonderful relationship. I feel love. I feel significant without any of that stuff. How many kids, how many people, who, not even a kid, somebody's just in an immature place, have done something stupid just to get their needs met, and they wouldn't do it again once they realize that was just not for them. So once again, it's just society will judge, but if you're not doing it, why would you judge yourself in that way? And the truth was, she wasn't judging herself. She was just adopting the judgments of society. And once we could separate that, she could stop worrying about their views, because their views and her views, now she's broken that connection. So that's it. That's all I wanted to share today. Look, if there's something I missed, let me know. I didn't go into a lot of the really painful stuff around around being hurt or raped or taken advantage of in these fashions, because I think that stuff therapists and great counselors, and for that matter coaches as well, and psychological practitioners of all sorts of different sorts, have really phenomenal value to add in those areas, and as I think do I think that's well oiled. When somebody's harmed in a way that's a deep spiritual pain, there's a healing process that you can research, you can log into, you can follow, that can handle a lot of that. I think the conversations I wanted to have today were things about the gray areas, about what about when it's I'm not, my life isn't shattered by this, but it still comes up for me. I'm still thinking about it. It's still maybe limiting me in some way. Because as a coach, my job is not to try to heal somebody. That's a therapist's job. It would be illegal for a coach to try to diagnose someone with a malady, then like fix the malady. As your coach, if I'm working with you, my job is to know that you're whole and complete just the way you are, that there's nothing wrong with you, that you're totally healthy, assuming you are, and if you're not, we've got to find a therapist for you. But if you are, all my clients are, if there's still something holding you back, or there's still something that's not quite where you want it to be yet, or there's another level for you, then these kind of issues can create huge limitations, painful limitations on somebody's life. And so my job is to make sure that we just rip this shit to shreds, that we just completely break through those limitations, and so those conversations are, I think, in fact, actually a lot more challenging, because this is where we get into a gray area. This is where it's harder to know right and wrong, because it's not so binary, it's not so black and white. And in a lot of these sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual abuse type of situations, where all these different psychologies, all these different ideas are things that have come up for people over time, it's not black and white. It becomes a gray area, and those gray areas, we can get mired up, we can get stuck, we can end up living in no man's land, living in the gray zone of our life. And then we're disempowered from that. It doesn't mean that we can't survive. Like, I don't work with people who can't survive, but I certainly do work with people who are, and women as well, who have created these judgments, created these limiting beliefs, who have lived through something that was painful, but now they're fine, now they're great. And at the same time, there's another level for them, and they're probably not going to get there unless they break through those issues and those limitations. Those are the areas where I think not as much ground has been broken, and where I think as coaches, if you're a coach, you're a leader in this area, personal development guru, whatever, you have a lot you can bring to the table. And so I hope you steal some of these ideas and share some of it with your clients. And then again, let me know what I missed. Let me know where I'm wrong. Let me know where what really resonated for you and what you think really rings true. And then let's take a look, like, what's going on. Like, the questions I would leave you with today would be, what are past experiences that you've had, no matter how painful, that you've got past maybe, but you still have limiting beliefs that are limiting you in some way, in your relationships or in your job or in your career or in your life or in your emotions for today and into the future. What are those limiting beliefs? What are those limiting ideas? Are there things that are judgments that other people have made, or you've made for that matter, on yourself, that have somehow held you back? And what are those judgments? And what are you going to do to resolve those? Are there actions that you need to take that fear or limitation has held you back from, based upon a past event or based upon your concern about someone else's judgments? And what is it going to take for you? Like, what is more important than that fear? What is more important than that pain? What is more important than those other people's judgments that would drive you to go ahead and go for it and do what you need to do, even if it's going to be challenging in the future and other people might actually judge you for it? What are you going to do about that? So feel free to pop those answers in the chat, or those questions that come along with those as well, and let's see what comes up about it. If you're on Facebook and you're watching this on Facebook live or Memorex, I'm going to post for you the link to our group, where I will be soon. This is the only place I'm going to post these streams. So I'm posting it for you right now. And also, I'm going to post my YouTube subscribe link in case you want to check it out on YouTube, because YouTube also, I simulcast on YouTube. So I just posted those links. And either YouTube or Facebook, if you thought this was valuable or was helpful, give me a thumbs up for sure. That helps share this with others. It helps kind of reinforce my own limiting judgments about whether or not I should be spending time doing this on the weekend rather than hanging out with my daughter, which she's waiting for me right now. And also feel free to check out the Facebook group and subscribe on YouTube for more of these in the future. And I will talk to you next time. Take care.